Okay. Hello everyone. My name is Tanistha Bhagawati. Wait, I'll just open the mask. I guess it's a little inconvenient. So my name is Tanistha Bhagawati. I am a student of the Department of International Relations. I'm currently in PG2, and we are here today to just give you a brief of what Policy Lab entails and how you can go about it. So before we start with our part of the discussion, we just want to ask you, what is your opinion on policy lab? What is your opinion? Just so that we are on the same page and we understand how much of it you already know. Does anybody want to go first? We don't want a very technical answer. We just want to know what your understanding of policy making in general is.
Yeah, right. So, what do you think? What is policy? What kind of ideas do you have about policy?
You can just say whatever you want. This is a very informal. We just want to know how much of it you are aware
And
of.
those of you who are joining virtually, you can also maybe type in the chat box and someone can also read if there are any comments on the chat box.
Anybody wants to go first? Or are you all here? Should I just pick up one of the PG2s and ask them what they think? Okay, PG2, one of you stand up and tell them what policy. No, not her, not her. Or we should help the juniors that hesitating to speak. So yeah, you want to go ahead? Okay, fair enough. You go ahead. Okay, that's a pretty concise understanding of what policy is. So yeah, policy is a set of rules that is published by an institution to address a particular problem. Now, Uddipta, if you would like to say something.
Yes, so as for my introduction, I was a bachelor student here. আমি এখানে political science পড়তাম বিএতে। এখন আমি Tata policy making, policy studies is not exactly my domain. আমি policy নিয়ে খুব একটা কাজ করি না, but since I have previously worked along with Tanistha only, and since you people were so enthusiastic about this, I was also happy that এরকম একটা কিছু হচ্ছে ডিপার্টমেন্টে, so I was I agreed to come. তো হ্যাঁ, তো বেসিক্যালি ওরা দুজন যেটা বললো তার থেকে যে দুটো জিনিস এলো, একটা হচ্ছে লিগাল ফ্রেমওয়ার্ক অফ পলিসি, আর একটা হচ্ছে যে ইনস্টিটিউশনাল এবং গভর্নমেন্টাল সেটিং। তো বেসিক্যালি যদি আমরা খুব বেসিক থেকে শুরু করি, তাহলে যে কোনো রকমের পলিসি খুব বেসিকে থাকছে হচ্ছে যে there has to be some problem, কোথাও না কোথাও কোনো একটা প্রবলেম থাকতে হবে, কোনো একটা গ্যাপ থাকতে হবে in terms of maybe how people are living or in terms of how people are experiencing something daily, যেখানে there needs to be a change or an intervention. ঠিক আছে, so this basic thing needs to be there. এবারে সেখান থেকে what we can do is the first step of the policy process is where we set the agenda. বেসিক্যালি কোভিডের সময় মাইগ্রেন্ট লেবারদের অসুবিধা হয়েছিল, if this is a problem, then setting the agenda হচ্ছে যে আমাকে আনতে হবে, আমাকে প্রবলেমটা নিয়ে কিছু একটা যাতে আমরা করতে পারি, এইটা নিয়ে আমাদেরকে ভাবনা চিন্তা এগোতে হবে। তো এবার how should we do that? We do either advocacy work, যেটা হচ্ছে যে আমরা কনসার্ন অথরিটিসকে বোঝাবার চেষ্টা করি যে এটার ব্যাপারে কিছু একটা করা উচিত। এবার সেটা বিভিন্নভাবে হয়, সেটা থ্রু মিডিয়া হয়, থ্রু পার্সোনাল ডায়ালগ হয়, বিভিন্ন রকমের different kinds of NGOs can also collaborate and talk to the governing authorities, এটার ব্যাপারে কিছু একটা করতে হবে। So that is basically agenda setting. এবার agenda setting করতে গেলে যেটা is very important is that you have to understand the local practices and the local kind of socio-cultural setting যার মধ্যে এই বিষয়টা হয়। So for instance, if you're talking about migrant labor crisis in India, it in itself, first of all, it's very broad. So for example, তুই হচ্ছিস either, আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে, তুই policy maker নোস, তুই হচ্ছিস ঠিক আছে। So when you're thinking about it, you have to understand that migrant labor crisis maybe Bombay, Delhi বা অন্যান্য কলকাতা থেকে যে মাইগ্রেশনটা হচ্ছে, সেই মাইগ্রেশনটা যখন অন্যান্য স্টেটে যাচ্ছে তখন সেই মাইগ্রেশনটা খুব আনইভেন ভাবে হচ্ছে। যেরকম ভাবে তো মাইগ্রেট করে বিহারে যাবে বা সেখানে বিহারে লাইভলিহুড যে কন্ডিশন গুলো হবে ছত্তিশগড়ে সেটা নাও হতে পারে বা অন্যরকম ভাবে হতে পারে, বিকজ ইট মাইট হ্যাভ, সেটা ডেমোগ্রাফির জন্য হতে পারে, বিকজ বিহারে হয়তো কালচারাল ডেমোগ্রাফিক তোর ইনকাম ওয়াইজ ডেমোগ্রাফিক আলাদা, বা তোর ধর বিহারে কাস্টের যে ইকুয়েশনটা যার বেসিসে মাইগ্রেন্ট লেবাররা যায় তো শহরে কাজ করতে, যেই কাস্টের প্রিপন্ডারেন্স বেশি থাকে মাইগ্রেন্ট লেবারদের মধ্যে, সেই ইকুয়েশনটা হয়তো আলাদা। ছত্তিশগড়ে হয়তো কম্পারেটিভলি ট্রাইবাল পপুলেশন অনেক বেশি। So you have to understand the specific, মানে I'm just giving an example বোঝানোর জন্য যে you have to understand যে কোন specific context এ তোর প্রবলেমটা হচ্ছে, so that you can set the agenda. So agenda set করার পর what you want to say anything about this, or তারপর I can continue.
What I would like to add to this agenda setting thing, and I've also like written it on board, that while setting the agenda, you have to also evaluate the relevance. Because আমরা যদি একটা policy set করি, we have all the good intentions, we have the resources, and we just set a policy. But if it is not feasible, then what is the point? So feasibility is one thing that you'll always have to keep in mind. Whether it's feasible or not, then of course, like Uddipta has very elaborately mentioned, very important to take into consideration the socio-cultural aspect. And what I'd also like to add is, it's also important to kind of evaluate and see any existing policies which were probably in relation to the particular problem we have at hand or similar, because when we are inventing a new policy, it is either to improve or to change a problem which the previous policy hasn't been able to do. So that you're only able to do when you look at the past, you look at the policies and you see what are the problems. So I think Uddipta, you can take over from here.
হ্যাঁ, তো টেকিং ওভার ফর তানিশা যেটা হচ্ছে যে যেটা প্রথমে বলছিলাম, so basically there has to be a gap somewhere, right? So something is bothering people or something which has not reached the people. For example, ও যেটা বললে existing policies এর কথা, so you might come across, for instance, if you are talking about access to healthcare for say for say some slum dwellers of Kolkata, ঠিক আছে? কোভিড এর সময় তাদের প্রবলেম হয়েছে in accessing healthcare. So basically there are certain kinds of policies, there are certain kinds of schemes in place যেগুলো তোর already help them accessing certain kinds of healthcare, you know, মানে healthcare access. যেরকম তোর for instance there are collaborations with NGOs which provide them healthcare. There might be some government schemes. So these are the existing policy frameworks. But for instance, pandemic এর সময় আমরা দেখতে পাচ্ছি যে maybe these don't really work. So we have to come up with something beyond this, either by changing what has already been in place or by coming up with something new. So সেটার জন্য socio-cultural setting এর সাথে সাথে you have to also be familiar with what kind of legal frameworks, what kind of social frameworks, what kind of schemes that already exist to address these issues. এবং সেই স্কিমে কিছু গ্যাপ আছে কিনা, মেবি এরকম হতে পারে ফর ইনস্টেন্স যে তোর ফর এক্সাম্পল একটা এক্সাম্পলে ধর ফার্মারদের তোর what do you call it, আরে বেসিক্যালি ফার্মারদের তো প্রাইস প্রকিউরমেন্টের ক্ষেত্রে যে প্রবলেমস গুলো হয় সেগুলোর জন্য তোর এমএসপি এবং বিভিন্ন রকমের আলাদা রকমের লজ এন্ড রেগুলেশন অলরেডি ইন প্লেস আছে। But যেটা দেখা যায় যে on the ground problems and many of these deliverables don't work, many of these actually don't fit in to the existing conditions. There might be a problem of middlemen, there might be a problem of delivery on the ground with respect to these policies, there might be a problem in access to banking services, there might be a problem in access to credit. So এইগুলো হচ্ছে, so you have to be aware of যে এই জিনিসগুলো আগের পলিসি থাকা সত্ত্বেও এই জিনিসগুলো যদি প্রবলেম হয়ে থাকে তাহলে how do I adjust this to either make it better or come up with something that will have আগের পলিসিটারও the positives তার সাথে সাথে এই negatives গুলোকে অ্যাড্রেস করতে পারবে। এবারে when you are looking at this, মানে it's not like one day you wake up and তুই বিশাল পলিসি মেকার হয়ে গেছিস and you adjust all of the issues, সেটা পসিবল না। you cannot come up with মানে a kind of policy যেটা সবকিছুকে একবারে অ্যাড্রেস করে ফেলবে। So you have to basically pinpoint certain problems যেখানে তুই ইন্টারভেনশন করতে চাইছিস, you have to pick up certain entry points যেখানে তোর পলিসি ইন্টারভেনশনটা তোর মনে হচ্ছে যে দরকার। ফর ইনস্টেন্স এই ফার্মারদের ক্ষেত্রে if you want to pick up access to credit as an entry point, তাহলে you can come up with a certain kind of policy বা certain kind of suggestion যেটা তোর banking sector use করতে পারে to increase financial participation and access to credit either through awareness program or through various kinds of other incentive মানে তুই ধর অন্য রকমের incentive দিলি মানে কিছু say free travel benefits দিচ্ছিস for them to come and talk to you about more about how to access the credit better. So এইটাকে তো entry point করে you can use. Of course, you can deal with multiple issues, but don't think that like doing something very macro level at একবারে সবকিছু you will be able to address. So this you have to keep in mind. But Tanistha, speak something. Do you want to say something or then we can like
no, in addition, like I think we should like start with this policy based
or we can just ask them if they have any questions till now.
Yeah, so like we've just introduced the concept to you. Do you have any questions so far? Yeah, sure, go ahead.
When I was doing my when I was doing a project, so I came up that secondary research methodology while doing like product public policy was not sufficient, like not that kind of sufficient to make a case.
Right.
Then coming to the legal kind of aspect of even with all the legalities that I found out that like the acts that are there are not properly implemented.
Right.
So their groundwork is a lot of like of primary important. So
right.
I want to ask you as kind of professionals or as experts in the field, what like how much important is groundwork to public policy?
So see, in a very utopian world, groundwork is everything. Like you said, there are acts, but they are not implemented properly, right? Which is a problem that is existing within the system. It should not have been. If acts were implemented, there should not have been a problem. So, like I said, a framework is very important for you to form policies upon. Otherwise, what are you forming the policy on? You can't just wake up one day and say, okay, I'll form a policy on education and I'll change everything. You can't. You have to do some background research. You have to read up what are the existing policies, whether they are, like Uddipta mentioned, that you have to fill the gap. Like, of course, policy, it's not very easy to implement a policy on one day and the next day everything is ordered. That's not going to happen, especially not in our country, because there also exists a certain level of corruption. So, for example, if you want to really implement a policy, a certain amount of money has been adjudicated to the particular thing, you'll find that a lot of it has already been pocketed by bureaucrats. Now, this is a very, I'm just going a little out of it since you talked about groundwork. Yeah, that is the realistic aspect. That is what happens in our country and almost all over the world. You want to say something?
Yeah. Finish it.
No, so what I wanted to say is, for a student, like at the moment, our concentration on policy lab, it's a very academic concentration. So we would stress on doing our groundwork, our research well, so that at least we are able to form a policy which at least looks foolproof to on paper. See, implementing something like a policy in our country of 1.3 billion is a very difficult task. But since we are seeing it from an academic perspective, whether you are participating in this competition or whether you want to study public policy in the future, you have to do your groundwork, you have to do your research, you have to know what is existing, and then move about. So yeah, groundwork is important. It is important anyway. It's just how much it is practically feasible.
Yeah, so getting back to your question, মানে আমি যদি ঠিকঠাক মতো বুঝে থাকি, so the question that you were asking is যে মানে groundwork বা ধর ground যে gaps গুলো আছে, especially with related to data, তাই তো, because you are working with secondary data. So basically what মানে in usually what policymakers who are actually policymakers do is that their entire policy making process involves also a lot of groundwork. They do a lot of surveys, they do a lot of experiments. For example, they will do various kind of social and economic experiments, যেরকম তোর randomized control techniques এগুলো করবে, করে দেখবে যে what আচ্ছা, তো বেসিক্যালি randomized control technique বলে একটা মেথড আছে বা আরো অনেক ধরনের মেথড আছে যেগুলো RCT বা আরো অনেক ধরনের মেথড আছে, মানে যারা plethora of methods যেগুলো পলিসি মেকাররা ফলো করে to see whether if they introduce something into the ecosphere and then if that is working or not, they select a specific target পপুলেশন একটা স্যাম্পল পপুলেশন সিলেক্ট করে তাদের উপর দিয়ে তোর ওই মানে রেডিও পলিসি ইমপ্লিমেন্টেশনটা হয় আর আরেকটা স্যাম্পল সিলেক্ট করলো তাদের মধ্যে তাদের উপর ওই ইমপ্লিমেন্টেশনটা হচ্ছে না হয়ে তারা দেখার চেষ্টা করছে কোনটায় বেটার হচ্ছে তাদের কন্ডিশন ওরা সার্টেন পিরিয়ড অফ টাইম হ্যাঁ এরকম এক্সপেরিমেন্ট হয় এটা আমি জাস্ট একটা এক্সাম্পল দিলাম এরকম অনেক রকমের এক্সপেরিমেন্ট হয় তো এই এক্সপেরিমেন্ট গুলো হয় তার সাথে সাথে গ্রাউন্ডে ডেটা কালেকশন এভরিথিং চলে তো চলে তার বেসিসে একটা এভিডেন্সিয়াল ফ্রেমওয়ার্কের মধ্যে দিয়ে পলিসি অবভিয়াসলি ক্রিয়েটেড the policy is drafted. So basically, since you are, Tanistha बोल रहे थे, since you are students and obviously you don't have access to that, but still you have to think like a policy maker. So what you do is you basically rely on secondary data, which is available through various means online within a journalist you can access. তার সাথে সাথে what you can do is if you feel like what is like secondary data তে উঠছে but like or you find মানে have an inkling that maybe there isn't enough groundwork on this, তাহলে that can also be a policy suggestion that we need more groundwork on this. So that can also be a policy suggestion like maybe you can collaborate with NGOs and ministries to kind of run through surveys and experiments to understand whether a certain thing would benefit or not because literature ওটা clear হচ্ছে যদি literature clear হয়ে যায় তাহলে ওটার জন্য আলাদা করে তৈরি করে রাখবেন মানে আলাদা করে groundwork করতে because it's already clear in literature that for example A affects B and if you do some implement something which is A then it will affect the population X in B kind of way. তো এটা যদি লিটারেচারে অলরেডি এস্টাবলিশড হয়ে যায় বা এক্সপেরিমেন্টে অলরেডি এস্টাবলিশ হয়ে থাকে তো যদি সেকেন্ডারি ডেটা আসছে তাহলে তো কিন্তু লাগবে না কিন্তু যদি তোর মনে হয় যে এটা হতে পারে যে এটা এভাবে ইমপ্রুভ করতে পারে বাট উই নিড টু চেক ইফ ইট ডাজ তাহলে ওটাই একটা পলিসি সাজেশন হতে পারে data set but all existing literature if you are looking at reports if you look at reports if you look at already published papers ওরা কি বলছে মানে ডেটা সেটের বেসিসে ওরা একটা ইন্টারপ্রিটেশনাল মানে অ্যাকাউন্ট দিচ্ছে যে এই জন্য এই হতে পারে বা এইভাবে পলিসি ইমপ্লিমেন্ট করলে এই মানে এইভাবে বেনিফিট হতে পারে তো সেগুলোতে যদি অলরেডি না থাকে বা তার যদি থাকে তাহলে তো যারা ইউ ক্যান রিলাই অন দ্য সেকেন্ডারি ডেটা এন্ড সাজেস্ট সাম পলিসি যদি না থাকে what you can do is you can suggest that maybe there might be some relation so as মানে part of the policy measure you want to run an experiment or you want to run a survey kind of a thing to check.
What are the some common indicators to look for while setting up the policy?
Well, what do you mean by indicators?
Like common like what are the common cases to kind of find like in every time by making up a framework of policy?
Okay. So, we'll go there. Yeah, so in very short, এটা হচ্ছে যে indicators ওইভাবে হওয়ার থেকে the thing is you approach it with a problem oriented way. But you first of all come up with a problem. Like it can be anything. But it can be related to healthcare, related to education, related to any kind of stuff. Data you feel is important and in a very localized way. But don't go like India or South Asia, but maybe one state or maybe one city. এরকম একটা কিছু ডাইনামিক হ্যাঁ বা community এরকম ইয়েতে and then you think of look at literature what has been done and what needs to be done and what needs to be done থেকে you come up with policy solutions. So frameworks will vary across like across communities, it will vary across sectors, whether it's education, health, care, whatever. Even Tanistha, you can discuss the case study.
Yes. Okay. Just to make things a little more clear, we have a paper with us that Uddipta and I had worked on 2 years back. Just going to read out the title to you. It's called Measures to Address the Impact of COVID on Access to Education in Government Primary Schools of Delhi. So like you can see, this is a very localized case study based on Delhi, on education, and specifically on schooling. So we are trying to narrow it down as best as we can. So I think it has a link been sent on Zoom, just so that they can just like look at it. Header below.
And like tell them like in the format also they have to go through.
Yeah, yeah. Done?
Yeah, okay. So you have the link. You can scroll down and see there is this hyperlink section which says click here to read the policy brief. So you click there and you will get the link.
Okay. Um, so like we've gone about in the paper, just like Uddipta had mentioned, it's very important to evaluate the problem at hand. So how we've introduced the paper is, since we are evaluating education during a pandemic, it's very important to explain what has happened to education during the pandemic in a very general, the sort of an overview. That how COVID-19 has stopped us from going out of our houses, you can't access schools, but education is important. This is one of um, UN की sustainability ये तो আছে ना, education for all. It is on UN sustainability goal is important. So what we have done is we have evaluated existing public education schemes, because it's very important. Like we said, it's very important to go through what schemes were existing, because there are schemes but they are not working for a certain reason. So it's important to look through why they didn't work. So like we've gone about, there is one on improving the quality of education. So since India has a very broad socio-economic, cultural difference, so not everybody has a similar kind of access to education like all of us do. We can afford mobile phones, we can afford internet to access education, but not everyone can do that. So that's a problem. This hasn't been a problem so far, but it is a problem now during the pandemic. So we need to bring about changes to address that. That how can we address this particular problem for the population that does not have access to internet, because etc etc. But not everyone has access to that. Not everyone has knowledge about that. So we've also addressed some of the successes that the previous policy has had on this COVID situation and the concern. Because like while you are evaluating a policy, some of it works, some of it does not. So it's very important to sort of segregate what has worked and what has not. And we've also used some statistical data if you want to go through, just to see. And towards the end of the paper, we have some suggestions for the government of Delhi to improve how they how they sort of frame policies that would help the children in Delhi to access education. So, of course. So the first point, like I was mentioning, was access to online education. So since social, economic, cultural, and even gender disparity is existing in our country, like you must have heard that if the family has only one mobile phone, the boy will get an access to it and the girl won't. So she is left, so she will remain uneducated and family won't care. So how do we address that? So I'll just read out the portion for it to be clear to you. To make online learning more inclusive, the Delhi Directorate of Education, since we are making a suggestion to a body, must focus on infrastructural changes that can deal with the present digital divide, especially to keep up with the alternative academic calendar as rolled out in April 2020. So if you are aware, after the schools closed, there was the whole academic calendar there was certain disruption. So an alternative calendar had come out. So we basically suggested them to adhere to that. The government should prioritize the improvement of digital infrastructure to assist educational institutions in reaching out to their students. Delhi, which reports the highest internet penetration in the country and consists of the second highest number of internet users, should ensure equity in education access by focusing on areas with lower bandwidth and support students who cannot afford to purchase internet packages. Like I mentioned, not everybody has access to internet no matter how good the internet is. So through this policy, we want to create a sort of equitable environment where students are able to where they are given an access to internet. The state should work with the telecommunication units to provide stable and affordable internet connections by subsidizing internet packages for students of the economically backward sections. Access infrastructure can widen if authorities remove barriers to investment, promote open access, and make licensing affordable. So this is also looking at a practical, if you practically see if the government approaches a telecommunication giant, suppose it approaches Reliance, why would Reliance help the government out and make losses of its own? So the government has to do something for them too, right? So which is why we have made a suggestion that they make licensing affordable, that they remove barriers to investment so that they have an incentive to help the government as well. This would include more participants in the sector who can offer competitive prices for wider access to the internet, which could benefit more consumers. We've all smartphones to economically backward students and reimburse schools to cover reasonable procurement costs for the same, because like I said, incentive is very important for all parties that are involved. So if the school does not have any incentive, if the school has to shell out money from its own pocket, why would it do that? So it is the government who has to step in here, just like, so see, like you had mentioned that there is a divide between the groundwork and what is really happening. So the Delhi High Court has already passed a judgment where it is making it mandatory for private and public schools to ensure that all of their students have access to internet, but it has for some reasons not happened. The state education department's collaboration with private service providers to fund projects that increase access to e-devices along with data packages will potentially raise the percentage of students who can access online classes without adding to the economic burden of the family. And there was a certain budget that was allocated, which is about 7,031 crore rupees just to implement these schemes. And we've also suggested that they create a separate corpus funds for school so that they are able to use that money to procure internet or smartphone devices for the students. The second point that we've moved on to is ensuring regular supply of midday meals. Now, all of you must be aware that this is a very sad but common joke that most children go to school only to access midday meals because they do not have enough to eat. Now that schools have closed, one meal of theirs is totally gone. Now, what are they going to do about it? In our policy brief, what we have suggested is to address the gaps in fulfilling the goals of midday meal scheme in crucial times like this, laying out immediate provision for guaranteed midday meals for all children in public schools should be a part of the policy agenda. Okay. To achieve this, the Delhi government can look towards the policy of Kerala. Here we brought in Kerala's policy just to make a comparison and they understand better. Towards the policy of Kerala, which has rolled out a scheme for distributing free food kits to students registered under the midday meal program in the state, wherein rupees 81.37 crore has already been allocated. Additionally, an analysis of the Kerala state budget for 2019-20 shows a generous allocation of 526 crores for the expenditure of the midday meal program. Oh no, it's from here. The distribution of meals in the event of schools being closed can be ensured through the school management committees, because we can't go about giving a meal to everyone just ghar ghar jaake. So we have suggested that the meals are supplied to the students through the school management community. The government of Delhi has already empowered the SMC in several ways, including capacity building among its members, organizing SMC Sabhas, and the initiation of SMC apps. These SMC Sabhas can undertake the task of coordinating the distribution. The central government has already released 27 crores for the extension of the midday meal scheme. Besides, the Delhi government's budget for 2019-20 has seen the education sector take the highest share of allocation, amounting to 26% of the total budget. The recent budget of 2020-21 is also indicative of a high share of allocation of the budget. A special fund for the allocation made to education can be drawn out to serve this purpose, as midday meals play an important and crucial role in ensuring school enrollment. Would you say if you would like to take it?
Yeah, so basically এখন অবধি whatever she discussed সেখান থেকে যেটা just a giveaway point is we can discuss this paper at length, but we have to go through the IRSC topic as well. So যেরকম last midday meal এর ক্ষেত্রে যেটা বললো to address the gap, midday meal scheme এর যেটা laying out provisions to guarantee midday meal scheme, এটা খুব important, everyone knows, but this is very generic. We need to improve midday meal conditions. We need to improve livelihood conditions of waste pickers. These are generic suggestions, but you have to go deep to the existing provisions. যেরকম এখানেও বললো যে the kind of budgetary allocations যেগুলো আছে সেখান থেকে কিভাবে budgetary allocation বাড়ানো যায় বা কিভাবে স্কুল ম্যানেজমেন্ট কমিটির মধ্যে দিয়ে মিড ডে মিলের ডেলিভারিটা গ্যারান্টিড করা যায়. These are concrete policy suggestions because these are going to help on ground. Otherwise just saying হ্যাঁ মিড ডে মিল সবার পাওয়া উচিত is not policy. Okay, so it's not, you have to be specific how you do it. আর সেইটা করার জন্য you have to look at secondary literature. So বাকি points গুলো I think you can if you can go through that link and see the entire paper, but you if you want you can xerox this as well যদি তোমাদের কারো দরকার পড়ে. So Pratisha, do you want to start off with the topic? I have Pratisha, you want to start off with the topic, or I have written something, I can tell them this, or then you can explain.
You go on first.
So the topic is resiliency of public health infrastructure in the global south. So this is the undergraduate topic. So how do you go about it? Firstly, you have to see the topic very well. So topic in Midday, there are keywords to approach agenda setting. First key topic number one is a public. So you know that you are dealing with essentially public healthcare systems. So basic, so this is number two. So you know that you are not interested in generalized health of people. You are not interested in, for example, various kinds of private or individual provisions to help, so different kinds of NGOs by organizational health. You are specifically referring to public healthcare. And infrastructure is the third key word that you are not basically you are looking at infrastructural development. So A is intake keyword. The fourth keyword is global south. So basically what you are doing is you are এই চারটে keyword তোকে মাথায় রাখতে হবে যে public আছে, health, infrastructure and global south. এই চারটেকে এক জায়গায় এনে you have to think of something. So my suggestion would be that think of something micro. একটু ছোট নিয়ে ভাব. ঠিক আছে? For example, I can give you a suggestion, but I don't know if that would be ethical, but just while discussing the topic, সেটা হচ্ছে যে for example, you can talk about Maharashtra COVID-19 সময়. This can be a topic, or you can be even get more specific and look at one specific district. তাহলে তোকে সেই স্পেসিফিক ডিস্ট্রিক্টের যত রকম ডেটা আছে, যত রকম সেকেন্ডারি লিটারেচার আছে তোকে গুগল করে বা বিভিন্ন সোর্স খুঁজে বের করতে হবে. বা you can say, for example, Mumbai or something, you can do that. But don't go too big. Don't talk about global south in a bracket. Yeah, because তাহলে you won't be able to address anything, because global south is a very big sphere and global south itself is very fragmented. Global south এর সব জায়গায় একই রকম নেই, একই রকম ধরনের প্রবলেমস নেই এবং একই ধরনের প্রবলেমস আসবে না. So that you can do. What I was saying is, so basically since you're 800 to 1000 words, the go about ways যে একটা ছোট্ট introduction থাকবে, one paragraph as to introducing your topic, what exactly problem you're addressing. Then you go on to explain the problem. সেখান থেকে যে প্রবলেমটা বেসিক্যালি কি, if I talk about Mumbai public healthcare crisis during the pandemic, তাহলে সেই সময় পাবলিক হেলথকেয়ারে কি ক্রাইসিস হয়েছিল, পাবলিক হেলথকেয়ারে কি ধরনের সমস্যা হয়েছিল, কি ধরনের ইনফ্রাস্ট্রাকচারাল গ্যাপ দেখা গেছিল, যে ফর ইনস্টেন্স পেশেন্ট অনেক বেশি, সেখানে আমার কাইন্ড অফ প্রভিশনস আর নট এনাফ, সেই পুরো জিনিসটাকে একটা ডেটা বেস বা তোর লিটারেচার বেস একটা review and you have to sum it up in short, maybe one paragraph, since it's 800 to 1000 words. That সেখান থেকে you go to existing framework gap. যদিও problem and existing framework and gap দুটো might be interchangeable, but if you specifically want to show that there are certain existing healthcare policies মুম্বাইয়ের ক্ষেত্রে মহারাষ্ট্র গভর্নমেন্টের বা মুম্বাই মিউনিসিপ্যাল কর্পোরেশনের, তো সেগুলো যখন মেনশন আর সেগুলোতে কেন এই প্রবলেমটা সলভ হচ্ছে না, কেন ইউ নিড সাম আদার কাইন্ড অফ পলিসি, সেই জিনিসটা ইউ ক্যান ফোকাস ইন দিস সেকশন। আর ফাইনাল সেকশনে ইউর পলিসি সাজেশন, যে তুই যে প্রবলেমটা বললি কি কি প্রবলেম হচ্ছে কি কি জায়গা থেকে, সেইটাকে হাউ উইল ইউ sort of provide a solution, policy suggestion. There should be at least 3 policy suggestions. There should be at least 3 things that you are suggesting can be done to solve the problem. Ever it can go on to 5 or 6, but I think word limited এটা আছে, 3 would be, for me I think 3 would be enough. হ্যাঁ। Narrow down. I would say আরো narrow down করো, ব্রাজিলের কোনো ডিস্ট্রিক্টে যা, কোনো সিটিতে যা, because
So যদিও একটা countryর budget allocation হয়, সব হয়, because everything has to pass through the central government before it goes to the states. So all that is accepted. But when you are making a policy in an academic sphere, since you are doing it for an academic event, and you do not have the space for you to sort of take the whole country perspective and then make, because if you take the whole country then you have to খুঁটে policy গুলো বানাতে হবে। এখানে যেমন আমরা শুধু দিল্লির কেসটা নিয়েছি, it's not like education, online education is only a problem in Delhi. It has been throughout India, throughout the world. But we cannot take the world in our consideration because everything varies from region to region. Some does better, some does not do as well. So like he mentioned Mumbai, there were states which were doing slightly better than Mumbai. So আমরা যদি পুরো ইন্ডিয়াকে ধরি তখন একটু কেসটা একটু গড়বড় হয়ে যাবে, বিকজ মুম্বাইয়ে যতজন মারা যাচ্ছিল বা মুম্বাইয়ে যতজনের কোভিড হয়েছে তত maybe was not happening in another state. Maybe another state was coping better. Yeah, within communities, there were communities that were doing very well because they were taking enough precautions. Yeah, narrow it down to the community.
Yeah, area narrow down. You can also community narrow down and both area narrow down.
Yeah.
For instance, একটা topic হতে পারে যে infrastructure of transgender population in Delhi. পুরোটারই feasibility হবে হচ্ছে যে তোকে একটু খাওয়া উচিত, তোকে the advisable thing, মানে আমি যেটা বলবো যে এটা কামিং আপ টু দ্য টপিক, তাহলে তুই এইটা ভেবে এগো যে প্রথমে 3-4টে মাথায় ভাব দিয়ে তারপর দেখ যে কোনটা অ্যাভেলেবল লিস্টে বেশি, মানে কোনটা বাড়ছে। মানে এরকম হতেই পারে যে ট্রান্সজেন্ডার পপুলেশনে দিল্লি হেলথ কেয়ার অ্যাক্সেস নিয়ে আগে কোনো কাজ হয়নি, তখন সেখানে একদম প্রাইমারি জায়গায় করতে হবে। তখন হাউ ডু ইউ ডিজাইন দিস প্রবলেম এক্সিস্টিং ফ্রেমওয়ার্ক এন্ড স্টাফ। মানে আমি জাস্ট গিভিং অ্যান এক্সাম্পল, মেবি কাজ হয়েছে, মানে আই ডোন্ট নো। মানে you can try it, you can, yeah.
And then find out কতজনের কোভিড হয়েছে না হয়েছে, you will have to purely rely on data. Yes. Suppose তোর একটা policy like I'm tells you that no, this is wrong. Although it may be a solution to the problem, you think that this is not the right solution. There can be another way. So that will be your policy suggestion. That according to, because here you are not making a suggestion to the government of India or you are not going to implement it. It is what you think should be, and that is why you suggest it, because you think there is a problem with the existing policy. No matter how great it is, you might think कि नहीं ये मेरे को I'm not comfortable with this data or I'm not comfortable with this outcome. So that will be your policy suggestion. That if you were in the place of the policymaker, this is what you would suggest.
But for instance, if you are not, you come up with a topic that is already that has already a lot of policy suggestions being offered. So Shekhar, you can cite those policy suggestions and maybe say that something like this has been suggested, but either it's not workable. So if you think it's not workable, why it's workable if you tweak it in a certain way. So you suggest that. But as long as you cite the people who have suggested the policy, it's fine. But there is no problem.
যখন you are making a policy on the road, you are making some person. So it's always okay to say that this person there has made this policy which has worked there. But I think we all have.
So what is the next step? Like articles continue with submit the abstract and you get rejected, then you submit the whole referencing policy. Is there any further step or this is the final thing? Like,
No, no.
The instruction.
This
They
is
have to submit a
policy brief. हाँ.
So in short, you explain what you want to tell them, that this is
हाँ, मतलब one paragraph introduction, problem, this you can interchange or you can do separate, one paragraph and three or more policy suggestions. না, ওরা তো বলছে আমি গোটাটা চাইছি। Abstract আগে abstract দিতে হবে। Oh, so abstract you can just sum it up in like one paragraph, like the entire thing that your own problem take address. Abstract policy brief, no nothing at all. The abstract itself is a 1,000-word policy brief that you have to present. Carlos, you do this.
That is the whole entire thing. You just make a very pretty presentation and you come and show the judges. I thought abstract में फिर छोटो को.
No, 1,000 words.
Get selected, make a pretty presentation, and you have to be very convincing because every judge is okay. You cannot really compare with your own policy. तो खुद को पता नहीं है. Data music session. So you have to convince them that why do you think there has to be a change. So that is a you thing. That is what you will do.
Just to make sure মানে after like শুরু লাগবে যে policy brief করে ফেললাম মানে problem solve হয়ে গেল না এরপর activity করতে আছে convincing the authorities যে এই সাজেশনগুলো অ্যাকসেপ্ট করা উচিত তারপর implementation এর পরে আরেকটা স্টেপ আছে which is called impact evaluation যেখানে তোর মানে কতটা মানে after maybe 1 year or 2 years কতটা পলিসিটা এফেক্ট করেছে ঠিক আছে
Oh God. One paragraph, you have to be as laconic as possible. Right, because you cannot go about explaining a problem. You have to be very concise, very simple. What people think is they feel like they'll have to write very elaborate paragraphs, use very difficult jargons, but you don't have to do that. You just have to get your points across the table, and you can do that in 100, 200 words. If you really want to.
Explaining existing frameworks, it's not like you have to take the law.
Yeah.
You have to explain in paragraphs.
Because you are looking at a very specific area. You think that these are problems to act shota hote pade, but we do not have the space to look at 100 problems. I can just look at 2 and suggest my policy based on that. So that is how you reduce your words and just make it as concise as possible.
Or maybe আরেকটা হতে পারে you to do that মানে to come up with this you shorten the মানে you kind of narrow down the topic even further to one policy problem. মানে for example access of infrastructure transgender populations টা না করে lack of proper Uh, mm, Nursing support. So you narrow it down even further. So then you talk about the kind of nursing provisions that are available in general and how sort of the transgender people in Delhi are maybe not benefiting from it and what can be done to address that. So it becomes even more short. The more concise it is, the more best.
Usually confused as to which area you want to look at. So you have to make your work easier, and the person who's evaluating you, they have to be able to get a grip on, since we are looking at this from a very competitive, academic competitive point of view. We are not actually making policies. So you have to make your work easy so that you have a, yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. What you should keep in mind first of all is you should be ready in your head when you are going in a competition and you have, there is a chance that you will be counter questioned. You should be ready with answers before the questions are made. See, each point that you are making, you have to be convinced that I have written this point on my side, because everything you write on your side can be questioned. So why have you written this? Whatever data you put, so you have to be able to answer that I have picked up this data from this source because I thought it was reliable. This is a very noob answer. I'm not asking you to say that, but you have to be ready to be able to answer on what your material is, because it's your material. Anybody can pick up any element and answer. So you have to be sure about what you are writing as much as possible. There can always be a bit of thoda idhar udhar error. People might always
Don't say anything which you can't back by.
yeah, you have to be able to see, আমরা তো কেউ groundwork করছি না. We are totally dependent on literature and whatever data is available. So that is a very, you can always say I have read it from here, so this is what I know. The person sitting in front of you will be a specialist. They might say oh, this is something happening on the ground. That is not your fault. That's okay, because you may not know that. But you on your hand and have to be sure that your literature and your data is 100% foolproof. হ্যাঁ, যেটা ও SWOT অ্যানালিসিস যেটাও বলছিল যে একটা প্রবলেম একটা ইভ্যালুয়েট একটা প্রবলেম একটা হাতে আছে। ওকে, সো what is SWOT analysis? Okay. So Ayush asking to keep quiet. So a SWOT analysis is basically where you are evaluating the existing problems, or so suppose আমরা যখন একটা পলিসি ওঠাচ্ছি, there are goods and bads of it. Like I think আমরা যখন পেপারটা পড়ছিলাম আমরা হ্যাঁ ও সরি মাই ব্যাড, নট দ্য আমেরিকা ওয়ালা স্পট ইয়ে, হ্যাঁ আমি তাই ভাবছিলাম এ দিয়ে তো কিছু হয় না। So when we are looking at things, so when we are looking at SWOT analysis, SWOT is what? Strength, weakness, opportunity. এটা সরিয়ে দিত। Strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat. So even while we were reading our policy, we put a particular section where we've written about how a policy has worked in certain ways and how it has not. So that is your strength and your weakness. That's ठीक है, ये policy इतना तक चला है, that is good. But there are some loopholes in it. Opportunity or threat, so that if this is tweaked a little, like Uddipta mentioned, a policy, this is okay, but if it is tweaked a little, it can get better outcome. Or threat, so if it does not work, then policy over, go home. So this is, I mean, SWOT analysis is not what exactly I said, but it's just a concise understanding for you. Strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat. You evaluate, you read upon the strength that the existing policy has, the weaknesses that it has, and the opportunities you can create with your suggestions. You want to say something? Okay. Any more questions? Questions? सबको इतना समझ में आ गया already? Nobody has any question. Oh, that's good. Participate. You get nice certificate. Harvard. Oops. Yeah, I think you should give them a couple of days more. Yeah, it is very, I understand it's quite difficult to put into words, but again, it is your organizing committee who will decide. We can only put a word for you, but we cannot do anything else. Nobody is expecting you to change the world with your policy. Go easy on yourself. Read up enough, and like we both keep mentioning, be sure about your data, what you are putting in, because you will have to back it up when you are cross-questioning.
Yeah, so I think we are done. So
Yes,
basically,
how can we just introduce ourselves because we don't know any of them?
yeah.
Oh no, policy lab is over. This is over.
Yeah, policy lab is over. So basically, না, I just wanted to say something that is, মানে আমার কাজের সাথে এখন এই মুহূর্তে পলিসি দূর দূর অব্দি কোনো সম্পর্ক নেই, বাট মানে নেহুলি asked me to come আর আমি আগে কাজ করেছিলাম স্পেশালি with Tanistha only, so I'm thankful that you guys asked me to come and do this.
Thank you for being a very good crowd because I was pretty nervous. I don't know about Uddipta. I was very nervous that I'll make a fool out of myself, and I probably have. But thank you for being a good crowd, and thank you for being so nice to all of us. I heard you.
Done.